News Channel 8 presents New Skills for Living with your host, Tom Lavin, a healthy plan for healthy living.
Hello and welcome to New Skills for Living, a show dedicated to healing and wholeness in our community. If you've wondered how do people become dependent or addicted to alcohol or drugs or sex or food or gambling, or if you've wondered how does someone who is addicted, how do they become free, we're going to discuss that topic today in New Skills for Living. Our guest is Dr. Stephen Hayes. Dr. Hayes is a foundation professor at the University of Nevada. Dr. Hayes is the author of several books, numerous, actually hundreds of articles on psychology and psychotherapy, and he has been hailed as one of the most influential psychologists in the world. Along with the many books that he's written, this book, Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life, has been a bestseller as a self-help book. And I highly recommend it to you, and we'll be alluding to this book today as we talk with Dr. Hayes. So we're going to be talking with Dr. Hayes about the ACT perspective of addiction. And ACT is acceptance and commitment therapy, and Dr. Hayes is the primary founder of this particular therapy. Steve, thank you so much for joining us again. This is your third time on New Skills for Living. Thank you for being with us.
Great to be here, Tom.
Yeah. So, Steve, I think the first thing I'd like to ask you is, from the perspective of acceptance and commitment therapy, how does ACT look at this phenomenon of addiction? How do people become addicted?
You know, the word addiction kind of says part of what it is. That dict part of addiction is being spoken to like a dictator, you know, having the rule laid down.
Yes.
And who is laying down that rule? It's your own mind. And part of what our perspective is trying to back up and catch how it is that your own mind can become your own dictator, your own body can become your own dictator, and you can find yourself involved in patterns that lead you farther and farther away from what you really care about.
So can you tell us a little bit more about that then, Steve? So let's say, you know, like you got a 12-year-old or a 16-year-old picking up alcohol or marijuana. What is that process then? What, from an ACT perspective, what's going on with that person?
Well, there's different routes in. Some people sometimes drink just to be part of a group, for example. Other people because they're really feeling anxious and it makes them self-soothe and they can be with other people in a more comfortable way. So the beginnings are different. As the pattern gets stronger and stronger, though, it itself becomes something which is very hard to break out of. If you put down the alcohol when you've habitually been using it, it speaks to you in a way that associated with urges, focus of attention, constant kind of returning back to the possibility of drinking it. Should I be drinking, and then relapsing, and that whole pattern. So whether you come into it, however you come into it, you end up in a pattern in which, in order to focus on what you really care about and what's here for you to do, you have to learn to back up from the voice within, that dictator within, and learn to sort of watch your thoughts, watch your feelings, and then make choices that are linked to your values. And that's a core part of what we're trying to do with addiction, whether it's supposedly biological, we're going to talk about things like alcohol and substance abuse, or as you say, it's a very similar pattern psychologically when we're dealing with things you know, like gambling or like hypersexuality or other kinds of almost compulsive patterns that we allow to enter into our lives.
So when you're talking about this dictating voice, then someone is, and they cross that line, someone is really trapped then. They're kind of trapped in the behavior, and they're kind of trapped in their own mind. And
They are, and the thing is that the things that we're normally taught to do, which is that we're going to move forward when we can sort of solve our problems and think them through, when we feel good, and when we want to do things, that's the way that you're going to move powerfully forward in your life. That's really basically a fiction. It's a fiction, I think, for most people in most areas, but it's one that sort of claps on you almost like a bear trap if you step into the addictive patterns, because you'll realize that it'll always feel initially more comfortable and easier to continue with a pattern that's well established, even if it's leading you into places that you don't want to go. And you get caught into this short-term good and the long-term bad, producing patterns that are very hard to break out of, and learning to sort of back up, make room for discomfort, make room for thoughts with some distance between you and the person aware of the thoughts and the thoughts that you're having, gives you the choice and the freedom to then focus more on what you really want to be doing and begin to build your life one moment at a time.
This segment has gone so fast, Steve. We have about 30 seconds. Can you talk a little bit more about this, about choice?
I think the key issue here, and it's right in that dictator part of addiction, is how do we create more liberated human lives? How do we find a place in which we can be more conscious and have a sense that we're able to move towards what we really want rather than running away from what we don't want?
Yes.
Because many of those things are just programmed into us by our culture, by our history, by our biology, sometimes in ways that really don't serve our interests.
Excellent. That's an excellent point. And you see these finger traps right here. We're going to talk with Dr. Hayes about these finger traps and what that means in terms of recovery from addictive disorders right after this brief break. Hello and welcome back to New Skills for Living. You'll see up on your screen the website, easeap.com, where you are able to see this interview with Dr. Hayes. Dr. Hayes also has two other interviews on the website, one about using ACT in daily life, and the other is using ACT with chronic illness. And the other guests, too, that have been addressing different life issues and recovery from addictive disorders, all those shows are up on the website. So please go ahead and visit the website to see the other shows. And then next, I'd like to show you and remind you that there are over 80 newsletters on the website that you can pull up and read. You can print them off, or you can send them to your friends and family who might be interested in learning more about anxiety or depression or recovery from addictive disorder or forgiveness or making amends or developing gratitude in life. So there are over 80 newsletters on the website that you can access. But we're going to continue our interview now with Dr. Stephen Hayes, the author of this book, Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life. And I talked about the Chinese finger trap right at the beginning of, or at the end of that segment, and said at the beginning of this segment, Dr. Hayes would be talking about that. So Steve, would you talk with us about the Chinese finger trap as a symbol of the beginning of ACT therapy?
For children who haven't been exposed to this, sometimes adults haven't seen it.
Yeah.
It has a deep lesson, because when you put your fingers in here and you begin to pull them out, it squeezes down on you, and it grabs pretty hard. This is a cheap one. I could probably pull it apart.
Yeah.
But there's almost a panicky feeling initially, like, how do I get out? How do I get out? And it's kind of a metaphor for what happens with addictions. Addiction are often driven by avoidance. If you're touching a place where you, for example, feel socially awkward, you find yourself drinking to soothe that. And it's as if I'm going to avoid that sense of awkwardness and so forth using these means. But as I do that, I don't have more freedom here to move. I have less freedom to move. I'm more likely to drink next time and the next time and the next time. And eventually, even the urges involved with stopping a drinking pattern itself becomes something to avoid by more drinking. So you get into these patterns where life gets narrower and narrower and smaller. It grabs harder and harder.
Yes.
And it'll pull pretty hard on you. People will run out for many, many years in patterns that are avoidance-based and having their lives getting smaller and smaller. The wisdom that's in these little things is that if you're going to actually have the freedom to move, you have to move into it.
Yes.
And part of what we need to do clinically when we are dealing with the addictions is walking into what would be there if you weren't using, if you weren't gambling, if you weren't engaging in hypersexuality, etc., and walking into that territory with your eyes wide and learning to see, can I be with that? Can I open up to that? Is there anything in there that it teaches me? And then carrying all of that, can I make some choices and go in a direction as opposed to trying to eliminate it first and then I can be more liberated. In fact, that seems to squeeze life down, not open life up.
Great. Thank you, Steve. So along with that now, can you follow and maybe just go through the basics in terms of A, C, and T, what that means, and maybe reference addiction?
Well, accept, choose, take action is a little acronym for acceptance and commitment therapy that orients you towards the basic model. And life is asking you to accept something, not tolerate it, resign yourself to it, not something like that, but it's acceptance more the way the original word meant, which was to receive a gift that's offered. It comes from a Latin root that means that. And so when, for example, you're in a situation in which you're feeling anxious, taking the time to be gentle with yourself and treating yourself with some kindness and looking at that fear the way you might if you had a child here who was afraid. Will sometimes give you the room to now make a choice. What are we going to do? We don't have to make that go away. Can we bring that with us? What's here for us to do? That's the choice part. And then choices without action are meaningless. If you value relationships, you have to move with your feet towards relationships. Yes. And so what often happens inside addictions is people trade in choice and conscious action for this constant struggle with avoidance. And when you step out of that, it comes back, what do you want your life to be about? What do you want your next moments to be about? Directed
Yes.
towards what?
Yes.
And connecting with your values and getting your feet moving, or this choose and take action part of that
Yeah.
acronym.
That is some excellent information, and these segments are going so fast. We'll be with you right after this brief break to talk more about acceptance and commitment therapy in addressing addictive disorders. Hello and welcome back to New Skills for Living. We're talking with Foundation Professor and psychologist Dr. Stephen Hayes about recovery from addictive disorders. And Steve, one of the things that I think you and the other people in Active have been spending some time researching and taking a look at is the phenomenon of shame in addiction and recovery. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we've just finished actually the first randomized trial controlled study specifically oriented at shame in addiction. And what we found, I think, was really neat. It says something that's deeply important. You know, part of what leads to this avoidance thing is the voice within tells you that you can't have this and you need to run away. And most people who struggle with addiction have a deep sense of guilt and shame, and those are two different things. Guilt, turns out, is actually associated with ridding yourself of addiction. You don't want to be numb to the consequences of the things that you've done to yourself and your family and so forth inside your addictive patterns. But shame is not. Shame is the grease on the wheels of more of the same. Because it has this piece of not just that what I did was wrong, but I'm bad. And when you buy that, when you fuse with it, when you let it get up on you, then naturally the only thing that a human could try to do is somehow get rid of that. Well, a few drinks and that will soothe. And so that you start avoiding the voice within, which is exactly how it becomes a dictator. It tells you that you have to because you're bad. And what we've found is that if we teach people to walk into shame with eyes open and learn to back up and just allow the voice to be there, it drains it gradually of its energy. It does it more slowly than the methods that are normally out there, but by the time you get to long-term follow-up, better outcomes. So this kind of suppressive, frankly, Stuart Smalley kind of way of just arguing it away is not good for people because it rebounds, it blows up on people. And we actually found that the more that shame went down through argument, the more people 6 months later were using drugs and alcohol. So, you know, shame goes down, but it's if it's unhealthy, it'll rebound on you. And
so the more that's, if somebody, Steve, are you saying, so if somebody's having thoughts and feelings come up about feeling ashamed of themselves, and they say, I'm not ashamed of myself, I'm not ashamed of myself, I'm not ashamed of myself, that there's more pushback and the person starts to feel more shame, and then they want to jump in the bottle.
Well, initially you feel less, and then you're soothed, and then 6 months later it's blown up on you. So you get these V-shaped things where it was bad, it got better, and now it's worse. And what we teach people instead is, no, you have to sort of walk into the shame, sort of begin to listen to that voice, but not listen to it here, listen to it there. So have some compassion with yourself so that you're sort of treating yourself as a good, whole person, even when you're having thoughts like you're bad. You're not taking them seriously in a sense, not by arguing them and erasing them and making them go away, but by kind of opening up to it in a self-compassionate way. And then that slowly drains the energy out of it, and it doesn't blow up on you, it doesn't rebound.
And of course, that's one of the most terrible voices that we've all heard as human beings, from when we were 2 or 3 or 13 or 14, that we're bad, we're not good enough. And so
the great secret is that most people are walking around with that same secret. But because we don't share our insides with other people, we think we're the only ones. But that's so common. Most of the people you meet and through the day are walking around with some deep fears like that they're not, there's something wrong with them, they're no good.
And so in ACT, Steve, you're suggesting don't run away from that voice. Learn to tolerate it, learn to be with it, I guess embrace it compassionately, and it kind of dissipates.
And by doing that in a way, not buying into it. You're learning to sort of see it, the way you might see it as if a child was with you saying something that's frightening. You know, it doesn't mean what it says it means. It's simply part of our programming. And if we sort of take this more compassionate place, we can hear the voice, but we don't have to run from it, and we don't have to follow it either. We can simply, okay, I'm having that thought now. Now, what do I care about? What do I need to do? And instead of struggling and trying to erase, we simply carry some of those fears with us, which as you do that, they become less important because they're not controlling your life anymore. They're simply part of the journey.
Now, I want to talk with you more about values, Steve, but what you were just saying, you were saying like instead of like going to the dope house or to the bar, be clear about what someone values in life and head it, so feel the shame and then head in that valued direction, like what you want your life to be about, huh?
Exactly. When you stop trying to run away, the next question, I actually had a client once who I was working with this, and he really got it. He saw it, and then he looked up at me and he said, and now what? And what he meant was, if I'm not running away, what am I going to do? And I said, good question.
Yes.
Good question. What do you want to do? And so when we stop struggling, then we can start living. But in that part, you get to choose living towards what? In the service of what? To manifest what? To be about what? It's up to you. It's your choice, your life. And that if you can get to there, then life begins to unfold in a meaningful way.
Yeah. That is some excellent information from Dr. Hayes. And right after this brief break, we're going to continue to take a look at acceptance and commitment therapy. Hello and welcome back to New Skills for Living. We're talking with Dr. Stephen Hayes about acceptance and commitment therapy and recovery from addiction. So, Steve, just very simply, could you tell us a little bit more about the role of the mind and maybe also the role of spirituality in recovery? Yeah.
We were talking about that in the last segment of how we get entangled in self-judgment, self-blame, shame, and so forth. The mind is a problem-solving organ. It's probably only about 200,000 years old. We still are not, in grand scheme of things, that's not much time learning how to really master this tool, and we're still learning how to put the mind on the leash and not allow it to be our dictator, our master. It's not. It's not who we are. It's a tool that we have, but it will say that's who we are. And I think it's not by accident that all of the major traditions that work with the addictions touch this issue of spirituality, because I think what you're trying to do is find awareness that is distinct from the content of thinking, and learning just to slow down and to stop running away and to be still and to find the person behind those eyes. That helps us back up from the chatter, to see the chatter, but also now to be able to orient towards what we really care about instead of these automatic processes that our mind demands that we attend to, some of which just take us once again into the same cul-de-sacs we've visited so many times. And in addictive behavior, that's happened hundreds, if not thousands of times. There's no life down there. We know what's in the end of that cul-de-sac, but being able to shift attention towards what you really care about requires finding this part of us that's distinct from all that chatter. And I think spirituality is an important part of that. It's a way of speaking about that shift of perspective.
Steve, so in terms of the T part, the taking action and then on values, is that like spirituality concrete in a person's life?
In a way, I think, from this place, it's a natural thing. I was saying to the client who looked at me and said, and then what? It's the most natural thing, because what we've had is this conditional thing. When I'm okay, then I can start living. Or this problem-solving way. When the urges go away, then I can start living. If we back up and we see all that just as sort of content going on out there, and life is here now, it's the natural thing to turn towards that. Well, then what do I want to be doing? And putting our next moment into what's meaningful for us by choice. Not due to the wagging finger, not due to the voices within, but to the heart of the matter. What brings vitality, meaning, connection, purpose to us. And that's up to you as a human being to make that choice as to what that is. And when you get there, then, as I've said to my clients on this, fair warning, I didn't come here to remove your addiction, but the work we're doing here will take the fun out of addiction. Because when eyes get open and you see what it's cost you, it's just not fun anymore. In a way you can't fully avoid anymore. And so turning towards what's really meaningful becomes the natural step. Very
nice. So we've got another minute or a little bit more. I'm sure there are some family members of people that have addictive disorders that are watching us, and of course ACT can help family members deal with.
It can.
Can you tell us a little bit about?
We've done research on that. We know actually that some of these processes, even of avoidance and of fusion, getting entangled in the thoughts, co-occur within families. We end up sort of making little secret deals and almost little silent conspiracies within a family. Oh, don't talk about that, or don't do that, that'll upset Dad, etc. And so it's healthy for all of the family, and I think the 12-step traditions and so forth have always been onto that, to look at these processes in themselves and try to set it up socially. And we're getting some very nice resources. I mentioned that my former student, Kelly Wilson, has written, I think it's a really great book called The Wisdom to Know the Difference, that takes this book and puts it right inside and the personal work of dealing with an addiction. And I encourage people to check it out. It just came out within the last month. And it'll be helpful also to family members of understanding how to be more accepting, mindful, open, and values-based in their interactions with people that they love who have an addiction problem.
Great. And of course, along with our local audience here in the Reno-Sparks area, there are actually people from all over the world that watch this on my website or on the website.
I know that's true. I get emails from them and stuff.
Yeah, of contextualpsychology.org.
Absolutely.
And then also, you've seen Dr. Hayes' website up there, drstephenhayes.com. StephenCHayes.com. So those are some resources. But then also, if people go to contextualpsychology.org and you want to find a therapist anywhere all over the world, there's a part of that website that will show you how to find a therapist in Boston or Ann Arbor. You can see the website is back up if you want to watch Dr. Hayes' 3 shows now, as well as our other guests. We want to ask you to join us again next month. And thank you and take good care of yourself. And Dr. Hayes, thank you for being such a wonderful guest again.
It was great fun. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Steve.